My name is Theo Arinze, and before last month, I would have told you I lived a quiet life. Too quiet, in fact. As a composer, most of my days were about sound, building it, shaping it, stretching it, and sometimes wrestling with it until it agreed to behave. But when you work with sound long enough, you develop an ear not just for music, but for tension, for friction, for the pitch of a room tightening right before something big happens. And that Tuesday morning, before the HOA came after me, before they touched the one thing I owned that meant more to me than any royalty check, any commission, any applause, I swear I felt the world tighten around me like a snare drum. I just didn't know they were tuning it for a showdown they would never forget. The first sign of trouble didn't even sound like trouble. It sounded like peace. My wind chimes, the ones my grandmother brought back from Enugu, handmade by some old craftsman who carved stories into the metal with every hammer strike. They didn't ring like normal chimes. They sang. They had overtones that shimmered in the air, harmonics that wrapped around you like warm hands. To me, they were home. To the HOA, apparently they were noise pollution, or that's what the letter taped to my door said. I hadn't even had my morning ginger tea before I was reading accusations written with the kind of passive-aggressive confidence only a suburban board can muster. Before I take you further, before I tell you how deep the rabbit hole went, how far they overplayed their hand, how badly they underestimated me, let me pause here and say, welcome to Honorbound Tales. If you're new here, hit like, subscribe, and drop your location in the comments so I know how far these stories travel and how wide our community has grown. Now let me take you back into the moment everything changed. The moment I realized that some fights choose you long before you ever think to raise a fist. The notice was signed by 3 board members. Sandra, the president who had a permanent grimace like she was allergic to joy, Douglas, the retired accountant who corrected everyone's grammar on Nextdoor, and Millie, who looked like she'd been born with a clipboard in hand. Together, they formed what I came to call the Decibel Defense League, though not to their faces. They said my chimes violated Clause 7B, unsanctioned noise-emitting structures. Structures! As if my chimes were a 300-foot cell tower. I'd lived in this neighborhood for years, and the only reason I knew Clause 7B existed was because they seemed to rewrite rules whenever they needed new ammunition. I crumpled the letter and tossed it aside. I had rehearsals to prepare for, but as I walked to my studio, I caught sight of a movement on my security feed. 3 figures marched toward my porch like they were serving a warrant, and before I could even process what was happening, I watched Sandra lift a pair of bolt cutters, and clip the chain holding my chimes. The metal fell, clattering. For a moment, the sound was strangled, lifeless, empty. They didn't knock, they didn't call, they didn't even wait for me to open the door. They trespassed onto my property, stole something precious to me, and walked away as if they'd performed a public service. Something in me cracked. It wasn't anger at first, it wasn't even disbelief, it was grief. I could write 1,000 symphonies, but I could never recreate the timbre of those chimes. They were irreplaceable. I stepped out just as they were marching away with my chimes bundled like scrap metal. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "That's mine." She didn't even turn around fully. It was in violation. If you want it back, submit a request to the board. That wasn't a violation. That was art. It was noise, and this neighborhood values peace. I wanted to ask her if peace meant silence, if peace meant suffocating anything that didn't fit into her narrow idea of order, but she waved me off and kept walking. The metal glinted in her hand, and something about that glint, something about the way it didn't shimmer like it usually did, that was the moment the grief turned into something sharper, colder, and infinitely more precise. I walked back inside, sat at my desk, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't play a single note. I opened my laptop instead. See, they didn't know. They thought I was just a composer, just a guy who played with sound for a living. They didn't know that alongside my music career, I co-founded an AI-driven legal analytics startup, one built originally to help artists navigate exploitative copyright contracts. It grew, it got smarter, it learned. And eventually it became strong enough to analyze legal patterns, cross-reference violations, and predict outcomes faster than most law firms. And after a few partnerships, we became an AI-powered legal agency focused on structural abuse, workplace harassment, slumlord retaliation, shady HOA boards, you name it. And because our datasets required training, I had copies of things, public records, meeting minutes, archived emails scraped from legally accessible databases. And all of that was before I pointed the AI directly at my HOA. When I fed in their covenants, their revisions, their enforcement history, and their private correspondence obtained through public records requests, the AI didn't just flag inconsistencies. It exposed a cathedral of hypocrisy. Board members who violated landscaping rules for years, members who bypassed approvals for patios, dog houses, sheds, temporary home expansions that somehow lasted 8 years. Sandra alone had 112 violations, 112 that she had personally dismissed as exceptions. Every email they had sent complaining about someone else became evidence against them. Every insult they sent behind closed doors, every misuse of power, every moment they exercised authority without due process, my AI categorized, time-stamped, indexed, and prepared it for action. But the real twist wasn't the data. It was the automation prototype. We had been developing a feature capable of automatically generating, formatting, and filing county-level covenant amendments, completely legally, provided the HOA's own bylaws allowed it. And guess what? Mine did. Hidden deep in Clause 12D was a loophole that enabled any full audit of covenant violations to trigger an automatic restructuring, if approved by the board president's signature. And because Sandra used a sloppy digital signature system that reused templates, well, my AI didn't need her permission so much as it needed the system to believe she'd already given it. I argued with myself for hours. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to go nuclear because they stole my chimes? But it wasn't just the theft. It was everything. It was years of cultural policing disguised as rule enforcement, years of looks, years of being told which plants, which sounds, which colors, which decorations fit the neighborhood aesthetic. It was knowing that people like me were only tolerated when we made no noise, literal or metaphorical. So at 3:07 a.m., I pressed enter. I went to sleep, listening to the soft hum of my AI writing a new future. I woke up to chaos. At 6:12 a.m., my phone buzzed nonstop. 600 notifications from the neighborhood group, people screaming digitally, demanding answers, begging for clarification. The AI had done its job with terrifying precision. The covenants had been rewritten, legally, permanently, publicly recorded with time-stamped filings. Christmas lights banned after January 1st, violations backdated automatically, dog weight restrictions reactivated, trash bin policies enforced retroactively. Every rule they had twisted against others snapped back with mathematical vengeance. The board owed a combined $216,000 in fines, and Sandra alone owed $40,000. I walked outside with a cup of tea as neighbors paced their driveways in confusion. Dogs barked. Lights flickered as people unplugged decorations in a panic. And there she came, Sandra, storming toward me, eyes wide, hair wild, a robe bath flapping like a cape of indignation. "What did you do?" she demanded. I complied, exactly the way the covenants require. "This is illegal." "It's filed with the county." "You forged signatures." "I used the board's own digital signature certification system." You vindictive—" I said, raising a finger. "Careful. Clause 3C prohibits hostile language toward residents during disputes. That's a $500 fine." She froze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice, when it lands right, has a sound of its own. A resonance, a vibration that settles into your bones like a bass line. Everything after that unfolded like a symphony already written. The board called an emergency meeting. I attended, of course, sipping tea like it was opening night at the opera. They argued, they panicked, they blamed each other. And then Douglas tried to pin the whole situation on Millie, accusing her of mismanaging covenant revisions. Millie retaliated by exposing his years-long patio extension violation. By the time they were done devouring each other, they were too exhausted to fight me. I presented the evidence, the trespassing, the theft, the misuse of authority, the discrimination patterns flagged by the AI. They had no defense. By vote, unanimous, they dissolved the board. 1 week later, the county formally recognized the revised covenants. And my wind chimes? They were returned. Bent, scratched, scarred, but still mine. I hung them back up, and though their song wasn't perfect anymore, it had a new resonance, more complex, more layered, deeper, like a testament carved into sound. The neighborhood shifted. People relaxed. Dogs barked freely, decorations bloomed, noise, real human noise returned. And someone even left a gift on my porch, a small note that read, "Thank you for giving us our voices back." I think about Grandma sometimes, about how she said wind chimes were prayers carried on air. Maybe she was right. Maybe these chimes sang for justice in a language older than any covenant. So that's what happened. That's how an HOA tried to silence me and ended up silencing themselves instead. If you're still here, thank you. Make sure you like, subscribe, and drop your location in the comments so I know how far the Honorbound family stretches. And before you go, answer me this. What's the boldest moment you've ever had where someone underestimated you and you proved them completely wrong?